Wide receivers are being drafted earlier than ever before, so it's important to cash in on those we decide to take. In today's video, I'll be sharing the 10 wide receiver landmines you must avoid in 2024 fantasy football. Let's get to them. Number 10, Davante Adams. That's surprising, I know, because Adams just led every receiver with a 33% target share last year. But he's continued declining behind the scenes for fantasy, dipping in yards and points per game in each of the last 4 seasons. New offensive coordinator Luke Getsy also loved to run the ball in Chicago the last 2 years, leading the league in running back carries per game. Adams finishes the wide receiver 18 in weekly points in 2023, and his quarterback play didn't change overnight, only adding Gardner Minshew to the mix. Now, in his age 31 season, Adams is clearly overvalued as a top 10 wide receiver and top 15 pick in our leagues. Number 9, Stephon Diggs. Anyone who rostered Diggs in the second half of 2023 will be the first to tell you they weren't having fun. He recorded one top 24 finish over his last 8 games, and including the playoffs, averaged just 42 receiving yards in his last 10. But most people are looking the other way, as Diggs' ADP has settled in the 3rd round as the wide receiver 22 since he was traded to the Texans. I'm not buying that. Diggs ran 35% of his routes from the slot last year, more than either Nico Collins or Tank Dell. And that's probably where the Texans will use him, and he'll have a high reception floor every week for it. But we should be using our early draft capital to chase ceilings, not floors. And given the elite talent around him who earn targets themselves, there's no guarantee a 30-year-old Diggs can dominate volume with his new team. Dell, last year's wide receiver 16 in points per game, is being drafted a full round later and could easily outperform Diggs. I'd rather get my exposure to Houston's offense that way. Number 8, Michael Pittman. Pittman had a phenomenal year, finishing as the wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game with the 4th highest target share at his position. But those numbers don't account for his splits from Anthony Richardson, who only completed 59% of his passes in the 4 games he played. And that's important, because when Richardson was on the field, Pittman only averaged 6.6 half PPR points, compared to 10.4 from Gardner Minshew. Yes, Richardson could develop into a better passer this year. After all, he's only attempted 478 passes since high school. But we're drafting him in fantasy because he led all quarterbacks in rushing points per game, a cheat code at his position. Not because we believe he'll become a great passer suddenly overnight. Even if Richardson were to stay healthy throughout the year, Pittman's upside is very questionable. Number 7, T. Higgins. Higgins is typically treated as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy because he plays with Joe Burrow, and that makes sense. But that's never been the case when both Jamar Chase and Burrow have been healthy. With all 3 on the field together the last 3 years, it's Chase who has earned a 27% target share to T's 23%. But in his 5 performances without Chase, Higgins has averaged 14.5 points per game. So what drafters are really doing is selecting a wide receiver 3 who becomes a top 12 option when Chase is injured. And that is not worth a 4th round pick, especially in a year where the elite quarterbacks and tight ends in fantasy are being drafted in the same range. Number 6, Calvin Ridley. After going nearly 2 calendar years without playing professional football, Ridley unsurprisingly struggled as a wide receiver 3 with 11.3 points per game and his fewest weekly catches since being drafted. Head coach Brian Callahan obviously wasn't concerned, giving Ridley the most guaranteed money of any free agent wideout. But for fantasy, there's a real chance Ridley's best days are behind him. There's no denying the Titans want to pass the ball, additionally signing a receiving back in Tony Pollard and drafting left tackle J.C. Statham, number 7 overall. I mispronounced Latham's name. Let me do that one more time. And drafting left tackle J.C. Latham, number 7 overall. But DeAndre Hopkins, Ridley's teammate, has earned a 28% target share with the Cardinals and Titans the last 2 years, and averaged a team-high 28.7% share with Will Levis on the field last year. Rather than banking on Ridley returning to form in his 2nd team in as many seasons, we can arbitrage that pick by selecting Hopkins a full round later. It would not be shocking if Hopkins outscored Ridley altogether. Number 5, Ladd McConkey. A lot like the Raiders, We know what head coach Jim Harbaugh and offensive coordinator Greg Roman want to do on offense. In 4 seasons under Roman, the Ravens led the league in run play rate from neutral game script, which shows an offense's intent. And Harbaugh's offenses in San Francisco never finished outside the top 8 in that same category. And that's not a good sign for McConkey. At 5'11" and 186 pounds, both below the 30th percentile of wide receivers in NFL Combine's history, McConkey projects as a slot receiver at the next level. And he only ran 31% of his routes from that area of the field in college. He may not even play in 2 wide sets, which makes him a better dynasty stash than player we want to draft in season-long leagues. Number 4, Tyler Lockett. Lockett has been annually undervalued among Seattle's receivers in fantasy and has usually been a draft day steal for it. But after last year's performance, recording his fewest touchdowns and yards per game since 2017, I'm hitting the eject button early. We don't know how new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubbs will run his offense as a first-time play caller after working alongside Alabama head coach Kalen DeBoer in each of the last 4 seasons. And even if Grubbs were to carry over Washington's air raid spread scheme, there's no guarantee Seattle exceeds last year's 3rd highest pass play rate while within 1 score of their opponents. Honestly, there may just be too many mouths to feed between DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Lockett, and not enough targets to go around. It's a question I'd rather let my league mates answer by drafting Lockett rather than him being on my roster. Number 3, Mike Williams. The last time we saw Aaron Rodgers play a full season, he fell off a cliff with only 2 top 12 finishes as the QB 26 in fantasy points per game in Green Bay. And that team finished with the 3rd lowest pressure rate allowed compared to New York's 7th highest pressure rate last year. Even if Mike Williams were completely healthy in week 1, and he isn't after last year's ACL tear, we shouldn't bet on Rodgers supporting a 2nd wide receiver for fantasy given his recent inefficiency under Nathaniel Hackett, who schemed the league's 26th, 31st, and 32nd most total plays in his last 3 seasons with Rodgers in Green Bay. Number 2, Brandon Cooks. Cooks turns 31 September and, unlike CeeDee Lamb, has dipped in yards and PPR points per game in each of the last 4 seasons. His 8 touchdowns from last year, all caught inside the end zone, are also an anomaly, given that it was the first time he earned double-digit end zone targets across 10 NFL seasons. Maybe he'll produce a few usable weeks, but going in the same range as players like Jerome Ford, Dontavian Wicks, and Marshawn Lloyd, I would rather bet on a younger player breaking out than chasing the ghost of one in decline. Number 1, Ricky Pearsall. This one hurts because I think Pearsall is extremely talented, but he'll already be 24 years old in week 1, a red flag among first-round prospects. And honestly, I don't know how he gets on the field. Not only are Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel blocking Pearsall from playing, the 49ers recently gave Juwan Jennings a 2-year deal with $8.4 million guaranteed. In other words, it's Jennings who will probably be playing over Pearsall. Plus, San Francisco ranked 31st in their usage of 3 wide sets, only ahead of Atlanta. It's obviously terrible news for Pearsall's first-year outlook, making him a player we should avoid. Thanks for watching. Who are some wide receivers you're taking big stances on? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more. For access to our fantasy football rankings and analysis, check out our 2024 draft kit at EstablishTheRun.com.